On the 16th of February 1974, in Fort Worth, Texas, after attending a high school dance, 17-year-old Carla Walker was abducted.
The predator came out of the darkness and he said, "You're going with me, aren't you, sweetie?"
It was the last time Carla would be seen alive. When police found her body, they knew they were looking for a callous and merciless killer.
She was beat from head to toe and strangled and raped.
It was horrific. It was simply horrific. I had nightmares.
It would take almost half a century before Carla's depraved attacker was revealed to be church-going family man Glen McCurley.
He is the kind of person that we tell our daughters about, makes us not go out alone at night. He is the evil predator of our nightmares.
Glen McCurley had finally been exposed as one of the world's most evil killers. It was a murder that went undetected for nearly 50 years. When 17-year-old schoolgirl Carla Walker was murdered in Fort Worth, Texas in February 1974, nobody knew the identity of her killer until, decades later, cutting-edge DNA testing finally led investigators to 77-year-old Glen McCurley.
All of a sudden, we had, after 47 years, we had finally solved it.
The brutal killer who'd escaped justice for so long had no place left to hide.
Well, if y'all knew all that, why didn't you come get me back then or something?
Because they didn't know, but we do.
Carla's grieving family would learn that her murderer had been living in their midst all along.
Of course, everybody immediately gets on their computers and does research on this guy. They discover he's a guy who lived blocks from Carla.
Everybody on his street thought he was a great guy, but when he's looking at you, he's not looking at you as a friend. He's looking at you as a real possibility. He come see you one night when you're asleep or by yourself.
On the surface, Glen McCurley was a church-going family man. But beneath the mask, he was a calculating predator. This killer's story begins in 1943. Glen Samuel McCurley was born on January the 5th in Holmes County, Florida. His childhood was spent in West Texas.
He was the eldest of 3 brothers. When he was a teenager, he was sent away from his family to the Westview Boys' Home in southwest Oklahoma.
In 1961, weeks after McCurley's 18th birthday, he found himself on the wrong side of the law.
He stole a car and led the highway patrol on a high-speed chase, and they finally caught him. Then he was convicted of car theft.
He served 11 months in Huntsville Unit Prison before being granted parole.
Not long after he gets out, in February 1963, he marries a girl called Judy. They had a son and another son a year or 2 later. At this point, Glen McCurley is working as a truck driver. They've moved to West Fort Worth in Texas.
The suburban neighborhood suited the couple. It was an ideal place to raise children.
It was very family-oriented, very church-going, very laid back and trusting, and what you would think of as an idyllic childhood. The neighborhoods were full of kids, and we walked everywhere and had pretty much the run of the place. It really was a great place to grow up.
It was definitely thought of as a place where you don't necessarily have to lock your car doors, and your kids are safe to run around the streets and go to parties and, do what they do.
Just over a mile away from the McCurleys was 17-year-old Carla Walker's family home.
Her father was the strict military disciplinarian, but also the protector of the family. They were really, kind of that typical all-American family.
Jim Walker was the family's fifth and youngest child.
I had a mom, Charlene. My dad was Leighton. I had two older brothers, Charles and Steve, and two older sisters, Cindy and Carla. Had a good life. It was a good life. Carla was 5 years older than me, and she was just kind of entering the prime of her life.
At Western Hills High School, Carla was a popular student.
Carla was different. She didn't belong to really a clique sort of thing. She was one of those students who traveled easily among all the different sort of groups. And so that's what made her the all-American kind of girl and very approachable and sort of that girl next door sweetheart.
She's 4'11", 95 pounds, blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, beautiful teeth and lips, just incredibly cute.
She was dating the football player, Rodney McCoy, who was in my class. He was not your typical jock. He wasn't full of bravado. He was also very approachable and personable and got along with all kinds of different kids.
Carla was on the cheer squad. Rodney was a quarterback, and from all accounts, they were kind of the it couple at the high school. They were a very sweet couple to everybody and to each other.
In the winter of 1974, Carla had just turned 17 and had an exciting date on her calendar.
It was a Saturday. Carla and Rodney were going to a high school Valentine's Day dance on February 16th. The dance went from 8 to 12. Carla got dressed here. The ladies were all fussing over Carla, getting her all fixed up, and Carla was beaming, smiling, had her beautiful dress on.
Carla was wearing a baby blue dress with lots of white ruffles. It was very cute and pretty and went with her strawberry blonde hair. I don't think any of us will ever forget that dress.
Rodney pinned on the corsage, and pictures were taken, and aunts and my mom fussed over Carla. Dad and the guys talked a little bit to Rodney, said, y'all be safe, have fun, see you when you get home. And that's not exactly how it went that night.
But I went to the Valentine's dance that year because I was yearbook editor, and I do remember seeing Carla and Rodney and just, saying hi to them.
It was kind of a typical high school dance, After that, they rode around with some friends, kind of going by the usual haunts, the hangouts.
There were two fast food restaurants right there on farther on Camp Vui, Highway 183. It was Mr. Quick's Hamburgers in one part, and they shared a parking lot with the Taco Bell. And so that's kind of where the high school students would congregate.
They drove through the parking lot, got out, would talk with everybody. But unfortunately, the bathrooms had been shut down. They weren't working, so Carla needed to use the restroom, and Rodney drove her a block and a half south of Camp Vui to an all-night bowling alley.
The couple visited the bowling alley twice during the evening. On the second occasion, just after midnight, they decided to remain in the parking lot. It was a decision that would change their lives forever.
They began making out in the car and kind of leaning up against the passenger side door as they were, using her purse as her pillow, I believe, and the door jerks open.
Carla started to fall, and Rodney grabbed her back of her head and started to pull her back in, but when he reached down to grab her, he started seeing stars. He didn't know what was happening.
And he attacks him viciously, and he's very dazed, and the man hits him again.
He was just stunned, had no idea what was going on. Rodney said he saw a hand come in and grab Carla and say to Carla, "You're going with me, aren't you, sweetie?" And Carla was pulled out of the car.
Rodney's suffering head injuries, bleeding all over the place in his eyes, pretty bad. So Carla tells the man, "I'll go with you, stop hitting him."
Rodney had been beaten with a handgun. When the beating stopped, his attacker spoke directly to him.
He was in the darkness looking in, and all Rodney could see was the pistol coming into his face. Rodney says, the guy points it right at my forehead and says, "I'm going to kill you." The guy pulled the trigger and it just clicked.
The evening, which had started like a fairy tale, had turned into a horror story, and the nightmare had only just begun. The night 17-year-old Carla Walker was abducted from a parking lot in Fort Worth, Texas. Her family was expecting her and her boyfriend to return home from a school dance.
We waited for Carla and Rodney to come back to hear, about all the fun details of the dance.
In the parking lot of the bowling alley, Rodney regained consciousness. He knew he had to get help.
He hightails it to the Walker home.
I was standing over by the front door and I heard a car, tires hitting a curb head on, going pretty quick. My parents and aunt and uncle did too.
He's pretty frantic, saying they got her. Mr. Walker, they got her.
His right side of his face was lit up and it was all bloody. Big long cut, like somebody taking a knife and slit his cheek open a couple inches.
Every mother's nightmare, every parent's nightmare. Their daughter's been abducted at gunpoint by an unknown man.
I stepped back with my back toward the fireplace, watching all the events take place up here. To see these people who were solid people become panicked. When Dad found out what had happened and where it happened, he got his pistol. He was out this door to my left.
At 2:01 a.m., the police were called. A search of the area surrounding the Brunswick Ridgely bowling alley was carried out. Detectives recovered Carla's purse.
I found out about it on the news with Carla's picture. It was just shocking. And from that point on, I was riveted. All of us were, to where she was, what had happened to her.
Carla's abduction launches this gigantic search. And you got high school kids from her school searching. You have virtually every law enforcement officer in the area searching. Helicopters, dogs, all that stuff.
They're searching alleys, behind buildings, construction sites, pastures, rivers, gorges, tunnels.
There was a magazine in the parking lot. Rodney told police the story of being hit on the head with a gun. Obviously, when he tried to shoot Rodney, the magazine had fallen out in the parking lot.
The reason the pistol didn't go off, the perpetrator was hitting Rodney when Rodney fell out with Carla. He ejected his own clip, and there was a bullet in the chamber, but that gun could not be fired without the clip being inserted.
Police had their first real piece of evidence. The attacker had a Ruger 22 pistol, a recent model. What they didn't have was Carla or the name of the person who'd taken her.
It was frightening to know that there was someone out there who could do something like that.
Carla was abducted from a public place. She was abducted in front of a witness as well. Now that's an incredibly reckless thing for the abductor to do. This is somebody who's particularly dangerous.
There's a panic in his house, spirit of fear. Law enforcement started constantly streaming through that front door for several days.
On the Monday morning, her shell-shocked classmates at Western Hills High School struggled to make sense of what had happened to their friend.
They were devastated. They were like shell-shocked. I don't know how they managed through school that day.
There was a lot of speculation about it being classmates and even Rodney McCoy.
Maybe he's got her captive somewhere, or maybe he drove her out of town, or it was those kinds of speculations.
98% of the time, it's somebody that knows their victim and the victim knows the perpetrator.
The school itself became a focus of inquiry. Detectives spoke to students about the night of the dance in a bid to locate anyone Carla may have interacted with.
I went to the principal's office, and when I got there, there was a police officer and a detective and our principal. They explained to me that because of what had happened to Carla, they would like for me to look at all of the photo negatives from the Valentine's dance that the yearbook photographer had taken. And I didn't see anything.
As the hours turned to days, local, state, and federal forces, as well as family and friends, were all active in the hunt for Carla.
She just disappeared out of the parking lot. I met FBI agents, Texas Rangers, Sheriff's Department, City of Fort Worth, Benbrook, detectives, law enforcement officers. I do remember a palpable tension because I think these seasoned law enforcement officers knew the longer without results, the more likely negative outcome.
A lot of my classmates were part of those search groups that were just going out and walking fields and walking around Benbrook Lake, walking at different places where they thought that they could find something, anything that would have to do with Carla's case.
A team of officers were working a road that's now called Pearl Ranch Road. There was cattle culverts you could hardly see. One of the officers got out of the car while the other officer was waiting, and he went over and leaned over and looked under, and he said, "She's here."
She was found in a culvert, concrete culvert where cattle crossed through under the road, and she's found deceased.
At 6:35 p.m. on the 20th of February, 3 days after she was taken, Carla's body was found 5 miles southwest of the Ridgely bowling alley. The case was now a homicide investigation.
I don't know if you've ever heard a guttural scream from a mom who just found her baby dead. It was one of those kind of screams. It's hard to articulate the sound.
That night at the 10 o'clock news, there was actual footage of them taking the body bag out of the culvert near Benbrook Lake. I will never forget that feeling of seeing a body bag and knowing that there was someone I knew inside that body bag.
That same evening, at the All Saints Hospital morgue, Carla's body was autopsied. It revealed multiple injuries, evidence of sexual assault, and strangulation.
They found traces of morphine. Yeah, the medical examiner did say that she had been kept alive and hadn't been dead that long, but she didn't die there in the culvert. She had died before.
During that time, she was probably going through the most horrendous experience, and the person who abducted her was clearly enjoying hurting her, making her frightened, dominating her, or he would have killed her straight away.
I know the parents were freaked out and beginning to keep their kids in at weekend nights.
From that day forward, we locked our car doors. To this day, when I get in the car, the door gets locked.
On February the 22nd, just 2 days after the discovery of her body, Carla's funeral was held at the Western Hills Church of Christ. It was attended by more than 1,200 mourners.
1,000+ people were there. The procession line going from the church, which was law enforcement, had it all wired up and was recording, taking pictures of everybody, thinking that perhaps the suspect would be there.
There's always the possibility that in a crime like this, that maybe the killer will turn up at the funeral, or will be standing around on the edges, or will be watching, and the police will always want to be mindful of that.
They had us all file by the open casket, and that is probably one of the most traumatizing things I remember from that, especially at that age. The poor girl had been beaten and strangled, and it was simply horrific. I had nightmares.
The funeral yielded nothing on Carla's killer. The best lead investigators had was eyewitness Rodney McCoy.
Carla's boyfriend Rodney would be a prime suspect. When a woman dies, the first suspect will always be the intimate partner, the boyfriend.
Rodney McCoy was interviewed, but the problem the authorities had was that because of his head injuries, he couldn't remember very clearly what had happened to him on that fateful night, on the 16th of February, 1974. They sent him to a hypnotherapist to see if they could dislodge his memories.
It's over to see. I looked up and a gun on my face. First thing I noticed is his short hair, that kind of a skinny nose, some kind of greeny and sleeveless jacket, and cowboy hat. It fell off. What color the cowboy hat? I mean, it's real light.
He said the guy was dressed like a cowboy. I do remember him saying he had a vest of some sort.
Basing their investigation on the magazine cartridge left at the scene, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms were enlisted to find Fort Worth registered owners of Ruger pistols. With no gun database, it was a mammoth task, taking hundreds of man-hours.
So they began a check of all the Ruger pistols, which that magazine belonged to, in the area.
Authorities come back with around 30 names. The police take their time and interview each one of the 30 people who owned a Ruger 22. One of the people they interview is Glen McCurley Jr., the truck driver.
As with the other Ruger 22 owners, McCurley was brought in for questioning.
He said that his gun was stolen. He said, I was fishing and always took this gun for safety, had it wrapped up in a towel under the front seat of my truck, and I could hear a truck spinning off and taking off, and so I went up there to check my truck, and lo and behold, my gun was gone. And he said that happened like before Carla was abducted.
Police didn't have anything else on this guy. They gave him a polygraph test, and from what I understand, he passed.
Very, very little evidence. We're in the days before DNA. There's no CCTV, there's no number plate recognition. It just goes cold.
Despite the efforts of investigators, all leads had been exhausted. For over 4 decades, the stranger who abducted, raped and murdered Carla Walker remained a free man. Until invisible evidence left behind at the crime scene finally led detectives to the killer's door. In the decades that followed the 1974 rape and murder of 17-year-old Carla Walker, her family in Fort Worth refused to give up hope.
Cindy, her sister, and Carla's mom spent a lot of their time, a lot of their lives, keeping Carla's story alive.
I saw my mom from 74 until really 79, what I know now to be go through chronic clinical depression. She still got up, she still washed clothes, made dinner, tried to have happy Christmases, happy events, but she had changed. My dad was, to me, my hero because he carried my mom.
The mystery of Carla Walker's unsolved murder was one which never went away.
These cases never get absolutely shut down. They never say case closed where they haven't arrested anybody. So it becomes what we refer to as a cold case.
1974, 1978, 1985, every time a new lead came in, they jumped on it and they investigated it thoroughly. It was one of those cases that detectives worked their whole careers on. And so as the cases would go through and technology would change, it would come back up.
Things kind of quieted down and then things would pop up if there was a suspect, but then they would say that he had been cleared or whatever.
You would have conversations semi-regularly about, hey, there's this new technology, should we try it? Hey, we are thinking about sending this off for testing, what do you think?
In 2016, Carla's story caught the attention of podcaster Vincent Strange. It would catapult the case back into the spotlight.
I came upon Carla's story, just kind of internet search, and it grabbed me right away. There was one Facebook page. It was Justice for Carla, and there was just no activity on it. There was nothing happening. We need to get this out before the public, shine a light back on it.
When Vincent called me out of the blue at my job one day and he introduced himself and he said, I was told that you were the high school yearbook editor and that you knew a lot of people and that you might be able to help me get it started.
Carla's friends and family took part in the podcast. The renewed interest in her murder motivated her brother to give it one more shot with the police.
Jim, who was only 12 when the killing took place, never forgot and kept in touch with the detectives throughout the ensuing years, badgering them to look into what might have happened, keeping on at them.
Fort Worth PD had reopened the case at Jim Walker's urging. He literally called up the cold case department and said, all right, I hear there's a new detective and I need y'all to start looking at it again.
Leah Wagner, cold case detective, received a call from Jim that was stern and pretty to the point.
You've worked hard. Problem is, whoever killed my sister is either dead, dying, or getting extremely old right now. I think we need a new set of eyes on Carla's case because we're running out of daylight. And I would like to find this person, why he's got a pulse.
The paperwork on the case was extensive, over 6,000 pages of information.
There were 2 banker boxes filled with handwritten notes of leads and investigation tips and investigations the police had begun on their own. They truly left no stone unturned.
They were re-interviewing everyone. I know a lot of that focus was on Rodney still.
I went to interview, you know. One time, I think it picked me up at one of my baseball games.
Every time a new investigator would pick up the case and they would write out their who I want to talk to list, Rodney was always number 1 on the list. I think the ultimate list maybe had 38 people on it of let's re-interview these people.
The team were hopeful that DNA testing could help the investigation. The science did not exist in 1974, but perhaps now could help name the rapist and murderer.
And so we went to go pull the evidence to see what we had. And when I tell you, it is like an angel spoke to the crime scene officers in 1974. They did everything right. They preserved it in ways they didn't even know were going to be so important.
DNA tests are expensive, there's no question of that. And to carry out the DNA tests that was necessary on Carla's clothing would have cost $20,000.
Vincent Strange's podcast about Carla's murder had gained a lot of exposure. One listener, a TV presenter, offered to put up the money to fund the DNA testing. In 2019, an unexpected call came in to the police department.
They got a call from NBC Universal saying, we want to do a case in your cold case division. The detectives were literally working on Carla Walker's case at the time. And so they paid for some testing. Whatever our DNA was going to come from, it was going to come from Carla's clothes. There was so much of Rodney's blood on her dress from his head injury. Finding DNA on the dress that was not Carla's and was not Rodney's was hard to do. There was definitely a male sample that didn't belong to Rodney, that was semen, was on Carla's bra strap. And so in 2020, they say, here we go. And we waited. We get the call that says there were no matches. And it was so disheartening.
Not one single hit is found, not one. Well, we're back at square one, except we aren't. Another DNA test is conducted by a different company.
We had so little DNA left to test. We had 4 nanograms, which is nothing. It's nothing. And we knew this was it. We had 1 shot to test it.
They were able to take these, like maybe 2 cells. Starting in June of 2020, they started working Carla's case.
When you get forensic genetic genealogy results, they don't tell you who a person is. You're going to have a list of someone who was in the database for having given their DNA to a commercial database. And what you get is, hey, we know this person here is a second degree, a third degrees away relative.
On Independence Day weekend of 2020, the DNA tests finally revealed a familial match.
We've got a family named McCurley we think you should look into. There were 3 boys. They lived kind of in the Denton area. And before he can even finish talking, Detective Bennett, who knew the file backwards and forwards, which is an impossibility given the size of the file, but he did, he hops up and says, I know Glen McCurley. He's on our list.
And I think he had 84 suspects on that list. I think McCurley was 18th on that list.
The DNA analysis linked semen found on Carla's bra strap to the McCurley family. Next, they set out to demonstrate that it belonged to the man they interviewed in 1974 about the Ruger 22 pistol. The now 77-year-old Glen McCurley.
We did what's called a trash run, which means you wait until someone puts their trash out on the street, because then it is no longer private property. And in the middle of the night, the police come and take a trash bag and they take it back to the lab, and you try to find things in the trash that you know are going to have DNA on it. In this particular case, it was a McDonald's straw.
Law enforcement did all their due diligence, redoing a DNA profile to make sure the profile that came out of the trash grab was the same profile discovered on the inside of Carla's bra strap, which was a semen.
To make sure the DNA evidence would be admissible in court, detectives needed to obtain an official DNA sample from Glen McCurley. Police went to his home to speak to him again.
In order for us to eliminate you, the quickest way to do that is to get your DNA. Is that something that you would be okay with?
Glen McCurley is an upright member of the community. He and his wife Judy are churchgoers. They're well known in that suburb of Fort Worth. He hesitates for a moment and then agrees to have his cheek swabbed for DNA.
And all it is 2 big cotton swabs. I promise they won't go up your nose. They're going to be the inside of your cheek.
We had a search warrant ready to go, but he ultimately consensually gave his DNA. We sent that back off to the lab, and they said, this matches the straw, which matches the bra, which matches the crime. And so all of a sudden, we had, after 47 years, we had finally solved it.
Glen Samuel McCurley. It was the guy who killed my sister.
At a press conference in Fort Worth, it was announced, his name was announced. It was a shock to everyone because this was a guy who lived blocks from Carla.
He had sons that went to Western Hills. His wife, Judy, worked in the nursery at one of the churches that a lot of people went to. His family was known in the area.
Since 1974 until the day he was arrested, he drove up and down Williams Road almost every day. Drove by the house. He knew exactly where we lived. I'm pretty sure he came by here when we had garage sales.
He is a man who was able to commit this heinous crime and live amongst us like he's a normal person. There's nothing more terrifying than that.
After so many years of torment, Carla Walker's loved ones were within touching distance of the truth about her brutal rape and murder in February 1974. But Glen McCurley wasn't going down without a fight. And at his upcoming trial, he was going to plead not guilty. On September the 21st, 2020, the man who detectives had linked with the murder of 17-year-old Carla Walker was arrested. Glen McCurley was taken to the police station to be interviewed about that fateful night of February the 16th, 1974.
They went to his home and they arrested him, and they took him to the police station and they interviewed him.
I don't know the girl. I've never seen her. And I haven't killed anybody.
For the first hour, he starts saying he doesn't even know who Carla Walker is.
Well, I don't see how you could have anything on me because I don't know anything about it.
During the 3-hour interview, police worked to get a confession from McCurley.
How are you going to make things right before you pass away if you don't admit to the things that you've done?
No matter how many times I watch that video,
This is just your opportunity to tell your side of what happened.
every time I hold my breath. Where he pauses, and he gets real quiet, and he puts his head down.
I did do it, I guess.
That's basically his confession there. They got him.
He says, I strangled that little girl. Justice was going to be served that day. It's a pretty magical moment.
McCurley said that he was saving Carla, that Rodney was assaulting her, and he kind of comes in and saves the day. She went with him willingly, and they started having consensual relations.
She started hugging me, thanking me.
We know that's not what happened, but it does definitely put him there with her, which was the important part.
After 46 years, McCurley had admitted to being responsible for the death of Carla Walker. And he had another confession about the gun he'd claimed was stolen.
He also tells them where he's hidden the gun. A Ruger 22 he's wrapped in a towel and put it in the attic of his house. You might ask yourself, why on earth did he keep the gun? Was it a souvenir, a trophy?
No one thought he kept the gun. We didn't even think to ask it, because why would you?
He could relive what he did to Carla through that gun, but they do like to relive their crimes, visit back those feelings that they felt when they were committing those crimes, and that gun was a link for him.
So the police leave the interview and go back to his house and look, and sure enough, there's the gun. In 2020, court systems were taking a little bit of a break due to COVID. Due to McCurley's age, we knew we needed to try it sooner rather than later.
When we started going through pretrial hearings in May of 2021, I knew justice was going to be served. I knew I personally would be able to make sure he would never, ever breathe the air of a free man.
We knew, obviously, the biggest portion of this case that was going to be contested would be the new science, the forensic genetic genealogy. It actually had never been admitted in the United States at that point.
In Tarrant County Criminal District Court Number 1, Carla's friends and family had their first glimpse of the man accused of her murder almost half a century ago.
He was actually kind of an imposing figure. He was very tall. He definitely had kind of a gruff exterior the whole time. He also was in a wheelchair, even though I had seen him walk in and out of the courtroom on days when the cameras weren't there.
He just looked like a confused, angry old man. He had cancer. He wasn't expected to live long. I certainly had no sympathy for him.
Inside the courtroom, Carla's friends and family sat on one side. On the other, those who'd come to support the defendant, Glen McCurley.
Watching his son was pretty brutal. His son was just devastated. It was unbelievable, the pain in his eyes and his face. McCurley's wife, on the other hand, they were blowing each other kisses and stuff like that during the trial. It was a bit strange.
In the courthouse, under the glare of the national media, the prosecution worked hard to tell the story of what had happened to Carla.
On the night that Carla was abducted, McCurley's wife was away, so he had complete freedom, really, to come and go from the house.
His wife happened to be out of town. He went out drinking, and he certainly knew what he was looking for, I think. He didn't just stumble across Carla on accident. He was lying in wait for somebody.
How did he manage to confront his wife at church every Sunday morning, knowing that he'd quite premeditatedly taken this young girl's life? without a moment's hesitation. And what's more, tortured her, dumped her, raped her. How do you do that?
I saw the trial every day, even though I wasn't there in person. And when Leah Wagner, the detective, pulled Carla's dress out of that evidence bag, it took my breath away. To see that dress again just put me right back to 1974.
This wasn't a minimal crime by any stretch of the imagination. She was beat from head to toe and strangled and raped.
At the start of the third day of Carla Walker's murder trial, Glen McCurley, who for so long had denied his role in Carla's murder, spoke to his attorney.
The medical examiner and Carla's brother Jim were going to testify. They were about to go through that in excruciating detail, and I think he just didn't want to sit through it and didn't want his family to hear it. And so he asked to plead guilty. The judge has him sit down and says, "Are you pleading guilty?" And all of a sudden the room got silent.
That was pretty amazing. I don't think any of us expected that.
I remember turning around and looking at the Walker family and just thinking, I can't believe I get to be here for this moment.
On the morning of Tuesday, August the 21st, 2021, almost half a century since Carla's murder, 78-year-old Glen McCurley pleaded guilty to capital murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Jim Walker, it provided the opportunity that he'd waited nearly 50 years for. To look the man who killed his sister in the eye.
Because I believe in God, I'm a Christian. So I told him, so I want you to know, I forgive you and I hope and pray to see you in heaven.
Never in my career have I ever seen anything like that. Never, probably will again. So then I see Jim begin to hug McCurley's son.
I told his son, you don't own the sins of your dad. It's not on you. You've been victimized as well.
He was 12 when his sister died, and he had the grace to walk over and hug that man's family and show them love.
I was so happy for our community, for Carla's friends. I was so happy for Rodney, because he'd been under a cloud of suspicion for decades. I can't describe the peace other than I know where it came from. I had peace, and I still have peace.
9 months after his conviction, in one final desperate act, Glen McCurley appealed his conviction, but the killer was unsuccessful.
I pushed for the death penalty, but because of his age, we figured he's going to die in prison anyway.
The appeal process was finalized in May of 2023, and McCurley died in prison that summer.
On the 14th of July 2023, 80-year-old Glen McCurley died in the Gibb Lewis unit, Texas, taking his secrets to the grave.
He never said why. He never really said how. The police who found her body said that she wasn't killed there. She was killed somewhere else and dumped there. There's still a lot of questions that we would have liked answered.
For the family, justice for Carla, but also a legacy offering hope for other families that forensic genetic genealogy be available to help solve their cases.
The Carla Walker Act will provide forensic genetic genealogy funds to focus in on code cases and get those code cases hopefully resolved. Never give up. You're the voice for your loved one. We don't know why we go through these things, but remember, goodness is always there. There's good people there who want to walk through this difficult time with you, but don't give up. Have hope.
He abducted, raped, and killed a young girl in the prime of her life. He spent a lifetime watching the carnage he'd caused and the ruined lives of those left behind. Because of this, Glen Samuel McCurley's name will be remembered as one of the world's most evil killers.
It began on a night that felt like any other. The air was heavy with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and never lets go. A late summer thunderstorm rolled across the Florida coast, swallowing the lights of the small town of Cypress Bay. Inside that darkness, something terrible was about to happen, something that would haunt the county for the next 25 years. Just after midnight, a 911 call came through. The voice was faint, almost drowned in static. A woman's scream cut off mid-sentence. Then silence. When deputies arrived at the address, a one-story house at the edge of an orange grove, they found the front door ajar, the porch light flickering. Inside the living room looked as if a storm had passed through it, overturned furniture, shattered glass, a trail of blood that disappeared into the hallway. In the bedroom lay Emily Sloan, 26 years old, a local kindergarten teacher beloved by everyone who knew her. She had been attacked with brutal precision. The coroner would later say it was quick, but the scene said otherwise. Every detail screamed of rage. Detectives worked through the night combing the house for prints fibers, any trace of the intruder. They found partial footprints in the mud outside leading toward the tree line. They found a strand of hair clinging to the victim's bedsheet. But this was 1998. DNA analysis was still slow, expensive, and unreliable in small counties. The evidence was sealed, logged, and placed in a cardboard box in the back of the property room where it would gather dust for decades. At dawn, news of Emily's death spread through Cypress Bay like wildfire. Reporters crowded the front of the school. Children cried when they saw the yellow tape around their teacher's home. The sheriff promised justice. But weeks passed. Then months, then years. Leads dried up. The suspect list shrank from 20 to 5 to none. Rumors filled the vacuum. Some said it was a drifter passing through. Others whispered about an ex-boyfriend. But the only thing certain was that the case had gone cold. By 2003, new officers had joined the department. Files were shuffled. Priorities changed. The Sloan case was reduced to a line on a spreadsheet: unsolved homicide, female, age 26. Yet even as the world moved on, there were still those who couldn't forget. Detective Laura Keenan was one of them. She had joined the force a year after the murder, drawn by the kind of restlessness only cold cases seemed to provoke. Emily's photo hung above her desk, her smile framed by the yellowed edge of a newspaper clipping. Every few months, Keenan would reopen the box, sift through the evidence, and imagine the night again, the storm, the scream, the silence. But every path led to the same dead end. Until 25 years later, when a single envelope arrived at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab. Inside a request for reanalysis, the evidence code matched one name: Emily Sloan. It started with a statewide initiative to revisit unsolved violent crimes from the 1990s. Technicians were testing old samples with new DNA technology tech capable of extracting complete profiles from material smaller than a pinhead. The Sloan case qualified. They pulled the original envelope from storage, careful not to tear the faded tape. Inside was that single strand of hair sealed in plastic. The test took 2 weeks. Then one day, a red notification appeared on the analyst's screen: match found. The DNA profile linked to a man already in the national database: Marcus Dane Collins, a former construction worker with a long list of minor arrests, bar fights, trespassing, disorderly conduct. Nothing violent enough to stand out. But when detectives compared the timeline, their stomachs turned. In 1998, Marcus had lived just 4 blocks from Emily Sloan. He'd been working on a roofing job near the school where she taught. When questioned back then, he'd said he didn't know her, that he'd moved away before the murder. But the new DNA hit made that impossible. Detective Keenan reopened the file, spreading the photographs across her desk like fragments of a nightmare. There was Emily's smile again, the ruined bedroom, the footprint in the mud. And now, finally, a name that might fit the rage carved into those walls. Still, something felt off. Marcus Collins had died in 2010, found in a motel room outside Tallahassee. Drug overdose case closed. No chance of confession, no cross-examination, no courtroom showdown. The killer was dead. Or so it seemed. Keenan kept reading. When the autopsy was performed on Collins, technicians had taken a post-mortem DNA sample standard procedure for unidentified bodies. That same sample was what matched the hair on Emily's bed. But buried in the digital records was an anomaly, partial overlap, not full. The system had flagged it as a familial match, meaning the DNA likely belonged to a relative, not Marcus himself. Someone in his bloodline had been inside that house. The revelation sent shockwaves through the department. It meant they were dealing with a possible generational cover-up. The team tracked down surviving family members, a brother in Jacksonville, a cousin in Alabama, and one son, Ethan Collins, 24, living quietly in Pensacola. Ethan had been only 2 years old when Emily Sloan died. No criminal record, no signs of violence, but the deeper they looked, the more the coincidences piled up. Ethan worked as a night shift janitor at an elementary school. Same age group, same routine, same haunting symmetry. Keenan requested a covert DNA sample, a discarded coffee cup collected outside Ethan's workplace. When the results came back, her hands trembled. It was a 99.98% match to the hair recovered in 1998. For a long time, no one spoke in the briefing room. The only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights and the rain against the windows, just like that night 25 years ago. The impossible had become real. A child barely old enough to walk at the time of the murder was now the prime suspect in it. The science said it was his DNA. The logic said it couldn't be. They went back to the chain of custody searching for contamination. None. They retested. Same result. The lab supervisor called it statistically irrefutable. But Keenan refused to believe that a toddler could have committed murder. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A retired technician now living in Arizona heard about the renewed Sloan investigation and called the sheriff's office. She remembered the original evidence bag, the one containing the strand of hair. In 1998, before the state-mandated strict separation procedures, multiple samples from unrelated cases were sometimes processed on the same day, even the same workstation. She recalled something strange that morning, 2 hairs nearly identical in color and texture placed on a glass slide for preliminary testing. One from the Sloan case, and one from another investigation, entirely a sexual assault case involving a woman attacked behind a nightclub in Tampa. The suspect in that case, Marcus Collins. If the technician's memory was correct, the hair that had survived all these years might never have belonged to Emily's killer at all, but to Marcus cross-contaminated in a forgotten lab nearly 3 decades ago. Keenan ordered an emergency review. Technicians reopened the storage vault, hoping to find remaining trace material from the original scene. After 2 weeks of searching, they found a tiny piece of cloth, a section of pillowcase, sealed in a separate envelope, labeled Secondary Trace Untested. When that sample was run through the latest forensic sequencer, the result changed everything again. This time the DNA belonged to someone who had never been in the database. Not Marcus, not Ethan, a total unknown. The match connected to a new genealogy trace, a distant cousin in Ohio, an ancestry website upload that shared markers with the unidentified sample. Within days, the lab built a partial family tree. It pointed toward one lineage, one man who had spent years under the radar, drifting from town to town under different names. His last known residence, Cypress Bay, 1998. The name that surfaced from the genealogical trace was David Riker, age 61, a man with no criminal record, no fingerprints in any system, and no reason anyone could imagine for being tied to a murder from the late 90s. He'd once been a traveling air conditioning repairman moving from one coastal county to another, chasing work and cheap rent. To most people, he was invisible, the kind of face you'd forget at a gas station, the kind of man who could pass through a place without leaving a shadow. But in the data, his name began to glow like a flare in the dark. Detective Laura Keenan stared at the family chart glowing on her monitor. The lines of DNA connection wound through generations until they narrowed to Riker's branch. A distant cousin in Ohio had uploaded their results to a public ancestry site, and that accidental act had pulled a buried truth toward daylight. She whispered the name once, as if testing it against the silence of the office. David Riker. Within hours, the team built a background file. Born 1963, grew up in Tampa, 2 marriages both brief, moved to Cypress Bay in early 1998 for a short-term HVAC contract. left the area that September, the same month Emily Sloan was murdered. Coincidence maybe once, not twice. Keenan pulled the old witness statements from storage. One line from a neighbor caught her eye. A white van parked outside the house 2 nights that week, unmarked, running lights on. The vehicle description matched the kind used by repairmen in the late 90s. No license plate, recorded just a white blur in the rain. They located Riker through a Florida driver's license renewal address in Clearwater. He was still in the state, living quietly in a small duplex near the water-working odd maintenance jobs. No family, no visitors. Nothing to mark the years except faded invoices and the rhythmic noise of the sea outside his window. Keenan and 2 agents from the cold case unit drove there at dawn. The sky was pale and wet gulls circling above the roofs. When Riker opened the door, he didn't look surprised. His hair was silver now, cropped short, his eyes calm, almost serene. "Mr. Riker," Keenan said. He nodded. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about an incident from 1998. He invited them in. The living room smelled of bleach and sea salt. Everything was arranged with unsettling precision, remote at perfect right angle to the edge of the table. The blinds drawn halfway, leaving a thin slit of light across his face. Keenan noticed his hands, scarred knuckles, faint burns, the kind mechanics carry for life. He spoke softly, answering every question before she finished asking. Yes, he'd lived in Cypress Bay. Yes, he remembered the Sloan case, the teacher right, but no, he said he'd never met her. He'd left town before it happened. Keenan asked if he'd ever done work at the school. He hesitated barely half a second, but enough. "Maybe once," he said. "I fixed an air unit in June." That single word maybe echoed in her mind as they left. The next day, investigators collected a discarded water bottle from his trash and rushed it to the lab. 48 hours later, the results came back. The DNA was an exact match to the unknown male profile taken from the pillowcase inside Emily Sloan's home. The press release was prepared in silence. After 25 years, the Florida 1998 cold case had been solved, or so it appeared. But for Keenan, the elation never came. There were still too many empty spaces. If Riker had killed Emily Sloan, why her? Why that night? Why leave no trace except a single strand of hair on a pillow she never used? The crime scene photos showed an organized killer, methodical, deliberate, controlling. Yet his record was clean. His life uneventful. His neighbors described him as polite, almost invisible. Serial offenders left patterns. This man had left a void. She visited him again, this time in custody. The interrogation room felt colder than usual, the hum of the camera filling the pauses between words. "David," she said, sliding a photo across the table. Emily's face frozen forever in her Teacher of the Year portrait. "Tell me how you know her." He studied the image with detached curiosity. "I don't," he replied. "You're saying I killed her?" "I didn't." Keenan leaned forward. "Your DNA was found in her home." He blinked slowly. "You sure about that?" When she didn't answer, he smiled small, almost pitying. "You people keep pieces of people for decades. You ever wonder what happens to them? You store them, move them, open them again. Things touch other things. Mistakes happen." It was the same defense she'd heard before contamination coincidence, but when he spoke, his tone wasn't defensive, it was confident, as if he knew something she didn't. That night, Keenan went through the evidence log again. Chain of custody documents confirmed the new pillowcase fragment had been sealed since 1998. No lab crossovers, no mixing. The DNA was his, no question. Yet something in his calm refusal gnawed at her. People lied out of fear. He didn't sound afraid. Days turned into weeks. Prosecutors prepared charges. Reporters camped outside the courthouse shouting questions into the rain. How did investigators find him? What was the DNA twist is? Justice finally served. Keenan avoided cameras, keeping her focus on the one thing no one could answer: motive. A quiet afternoon in late July brought the next shock. A call from the lab. The mitochondrial DNA, the type passed through maternal lines, didn't belong to David Riker at all. The sample from the crime scene matched his nuclear DNA, yes, but the mitochondrial sequence was from another person entirely. Meaning he wasn't a direct match. He was a chimera, a genetic anomaly, 2 sets of DNA in one body. It happens rarely usually when twin embryos merge in the womb. One person, two genetic codes, one hidden inside another. In most cases, it goes unnoticed forever. But in forensics, it can mean chaos. Keenan stared at the report, the letters swimming in front of her. If Riker was a chimera, the DNA on the pillowcase might belong to his absorbed twin. Someone who had never lived, but still existed inside his cells. Science could explain it, but science didn't feel the weight of 25 years of grief. How do you charge a man when half his DNA says he's guilty and half says he isn't? She confronted him again, sliding the lab printouts across the table. You have two genetic identities, she said quietly. Do you know that? He chuckled, the first real emotion she'd seen. Maybe there were two of me all along. The room went still. In the following days, Riker's story began to fracture under its own contradictions. He claimed fragments of memory he shouldn't have had details of the storm that night, the smell of orange blossoms outside Emily's window. Things never released to the press. Yet he insisted he hadn't been there. Sleep-deprived and desperate, Keenan reviewed every file once more. Buried deep in the archive, she found a 1997 missing person report from Tampa, a woman named Grace Riker David's younger sister, 28 years old, vanished after a family argument. No body ever found. The case had gone cold within months. Her last known address, a duplex less than 2 miles from Emily Sloan's house. The pieces began to click, faint, distorted, but undeniable. Grace's disappearance, Emily's murder, David's chimera DNA. 2 lives intertwined, one erased, one surviving as if nothing had happened. Keenan returned to the evidence photos, zooming in on a blurred reflection caught in the bedroom mirror, a sliver of a figure outside the doorway. At the time, they'd assumed it was the responding officer, but under digital enhancement, something strange emerged. A figure wearing what looked like a repairman's uniform, and behind him, faintly visible, a woman's silhouette. Long hair, barefoot, standing still in the hallway. There had never been a report of another person at the scene. No footprints, except the intruder's. But the reflection was there, undeniable. Keenan replayed it again and again until her own reflection merged with theirs in the glass of the monitor. 2 shapes, 1 image. That night, she couldn't sleep. The storm outside the precinct mirrored the one from 1998, wind slamming against the windows, lightning burning the sky. She imagined Riker in his cell, awake, smiling in the dark. 2 sets of DNA. 2 siblings. 1 vanished. 1 alive. 1 body carrying both. The next morning, she ordered a full exhumation of any remains that could belong to Grace Riker. The records led them to an unmarked grave in a potter's field outside Tampa, labeled Female Unidentified, Recovered 1998. The bones were fragile, bleached by time, but inside the skull lodged between the teeth was a fragment of fabric, part of an HVAC company logo, the same company David Riker worked for that summer. When they extracted DNA from the bones, the results made the lab technicians go silent. The genetic material was almost identical to David's, but with slight variations that confirmed it wasn't chimerism alone. It was a biological twin. Grace Riker had died in 1998. Emily Sloan had died weeks later. The same hands had touched both scenes. Only 1 twin had been born alive, or so everyone believed. Keenan stared at the twin data on the screen, mirrored sequences like 2 eyes staring back. Somewhere between science and nightmare, the truth waited. Had David Riker killed his sister? Had he killed Emily Sloan to erase what was left of her? Or had Grace somehow survived, hidden inside his life, behind his voice, behind his calm, waiting all these years to be found? Rain hammered the roof of the precinct as dawn crept through a haze of gray. Detective Laura Keenan sat alone in the evidence room, surrounded by the ghosts of paper reports, photos, and transcripts stacked like tombstones on the table. The fluorescent light hummed. The air smelled faintly of dust and bleach. She hadn't gone home in 2 days. Sleep had become a luxury she couldn't afford. The DNA results from the exhumation sat open in front of her. Grace Riker confirmed deceased 1998. The lab had matched the bones to dental records, then cross-referenced mitochondrial sequences. No doubt remained Grace was dead before Emily Sloan ever was. Yet David's DNA appeared in both graves in Grace's bone marrow and in the bloodstains on Emily's bedsheets. 2 victims, one genetic shadow tying them together. Keenan leaned back, closing her eyes. The edges of the mystery had become too perfect, too deliberate, like someone had shaped the puzzle to mock her. She thought of David's smile in the interrogation room, the calm, almost serene defiance. He wasn't afraid of being caught. He was waiting for it. When the first light of morning broke across the water, she made a decision. She ordered every interview transcript from 1998 retyped word for word, every photograph rescanned at high resolution. Something was hiding in the noise, something the original investigators had missed. Hours passed. Her team sifted through the archives until a forgotten piece surfaced, a maintenance log from the Cypress Bay Elementary School dated August 17, 1998, 2 weeks before Emily's death. The entry listed an air conditioning repair under the name Riker G. Not David, G. Grace Riker had signed the work order herself. The realization sent a chill crawling up Keenan's spine. Grace had been alive weeks after she was supposedly buried. The autopsy might have been wrong, or the body misidentified. But if Grace had been alive, what had happened to her brother? She checked the personnel file. David had taken a 2-week medical leave that same month, citing personal reasons. No hospital records, no doctor visits, nothing but a handwritten note from his supervisor Riker called. Voice sounded strange, said his sister was staying with him. 2 names, 1 apartment, 1 van. Keenan stared at the twin photos pinned to her wall David and Grace taken in 1995. The resemblance was uncanny. Same bone structure, same narrow mouth, same distant, watchful eyes. They could have been reflections rather than siblings. In 1998, witnesses had mentioned seeing a woman leaving Emily Sloan's house the night of the murder, tall, long hair, wearing a gray raincoat. Police never identified her. At the time, the detail seemed minor, maybe an echo of panic from frightened neighbors. But now it glowed like a flare in the dark. Keenan drove back to the evidence vault. She requested the original videotapes from the crime scene, the ones too degraded to digitize. Dust coated the black case's labels, peeling. The footage flickered on screen in black and white static, slicing through every frame. Officers moved through the house, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. Then, for a split second just before one of the tapes ended, a reflection appeared in a mirror near the hallway. Not the repairman this time, something else. A woman standing at the far end of the hall, motionless. She wasn't part of the investigative team. Her face was partially obscured, but what little showed froze Keenan where she sat. It wasn't Emily Sloan. It was Grace Riker. The timestamp read 03:27 a.m., nearly 40 minutes after the 911 call had been made. Someone had returned to the scene after the murder, and it was Grace. Keenan replayed the footage again and again, frame by frame, until the blurred outline of Grace's face was burned into her vision. There was no mistake. But how could a woman pronounced dead appear alive in a house drenched in blood weeks after her supposed burial? Unless the timeline was wrong. Unless the grave marked Grace Riker didn't hold Grace at all. The sheriff signed an order for full forensic review of the remains. Under infrared analysis, one strange detail appeared. The bones showed microfractures inconsistent with decomposition in soil. Instead, they bore signs of fire exposure. The body in that grave had been burned elsewhere, then reburied. It wasn't Grace. The woman in the video, the one standing in Emily Sloan's hallway, had been alive, and she had come back to finish something. Keenan felt her pulse quicken. A hidden truth had been circling this case all along, moving just out of sight. She needed to know what kind of relationship had existed between the siblings before the world fell apart. She tracked down their surviving relatives. An aunt in Georgia remembered David and Grace as inseparable. He used to call her his shadow, the woman said over the phone. They never went anywhere alone. After their parents died, it was like they became one person split in two. But then she added something odd. Around 1996, Grace changed. She started using her brother's name when traveling for work, borrowing his identification, his social security card. Said it was easier to get hired that way, the aunt recalled. She looked enough like him, no one questioned it. By 1998, no one really knew who was who anymore. The deeper Keenan went, the more it felt like she was peeling back the skin of a single entity, one life wearing two faces, switching roles as easily as changing uniforms. Lab technicians analyzed the grave bones again, comparing cranial structure to Grace's dental x-rays. The jawline didn't match. The skeleton was male, roughly the same height and weight as David Riker. The man buried as Grace Riker was actually David. Keenan's breath caught in her throat. That meant the living David Riker, the man sitting in custody claiming innocence, wasn't David at all. He was Grace. The DNA anomaly, the chimerism, the mismatched sequences, all of it made sense now. Grace had been using her brother's identity for 25 years. When the DNA test flagged the mixture of male and female genetic markers, it wasn't an accident. It was her. The twin who survived carrying traces of her brother inside her from birth, then wearing his name after death. The shock hit Keenan like a blow. She replayed the first interrogation in her mind, the stillness, the calm, the way David had deflected every question about emotion, every memory of Emily Sloan. It wasn't denial. It was distance. It was someone speaking about a crime they had lived through as another person. But one question still remained. Why kill Emily Sloan? The answer came from a forgotten file buried in the district archives, a statement from one of Emily's colleagues at the school never followed up. There was a new repair technician on campus that summer. She was quiet, strange, kept asking questions about Miss Sloan's classroom schedule. The technician's name on the visitor log D. Riker, but the photo ID attached to the record showed Grace. Keenan sat back in her chair, the pieces finally locking into place. Grace had assumed her brother's name to work under male credentials. When he discovered the deception, something violent happened, a confrontation, a death, a fire. She buried him, took his identity, and kept living as David. Weeks later, perhaps driven by guilt or madness, she turned her rage on Emily Sloan, a woman she envied, admired, or feared. The line between logic and obsession had vanished long before that night. When Keenan returned to the holding cell, she found David standing by the window, staring out at the rain. The cuffs on his wrists glinted in the pale light. "Tell me what really happened," she said quietly. He turned slowly, and for the first time she saw something shift behind his calm expression, a flicker of grief, almost tenderness. "I already did," he murmured. "You just weren't listening." Keenan waited. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. Then he added, almost to himself, he wanted to leave. "I couldn't let him." She leaned closer. "Who?" "My brother." The words hung in the air like smoke. That night, Keenan wrote her report in silence, unable to shake the image of those mirrored faces, one buried one, breathing, both trapped in the same identity. DNA had solved the case, but it had also blurred the line between the killer and the dead. Forensic teams confirmed the truth the following week. The mitochondrial DNA from the pillowcase carried both maternal and paternal sequences impossible in normal biology, unless two sets of cells had lived together inside one person. Grace and David had been twins once, then one. The Florida 1998 cold case was officially closed. The public was told that advances in DNA technology had finally identified the killer. But for Keenan, there was no closure, only the echo of a woman who refused to die, who had carried her brother's blood and his name like a mask for a quarter of a century. The file ended with a single line typed beneath the closing summary, "Identity confirmed, subject self-identified as both." Keenan signed the report, shut off the light, and walked out into the storm. Somewhere beyond the thunder, she thought she heard two voices whispering in the same breath, one male, one female, both saying the same name. The storm that night seemed endless. Wind howled through the parking lot outside the precinct, scattering palm fronds and debris across the asphalt. Inside, the air hung thick and motionless, as if even the walls were listening. Detective Laura Keenan sat in the dim light of her office, staring at the closed case file that refused to feel finished. Case closed. 2 words printed in black ink, sharp and absolute. But in her chest, there was only the slow churn of unease, a sense that the truth they'd uncovered wasn't the whole truth, that something deeper still pulsed beneath the surface, like a heartbeat under the floorboards. The official narrative had already begun to spread. The sheriff's office held a press conference that morning. bright lights flashing, cameras, microphones thrust forward like weapons. The reporters wanted a headline. They got one. Florida, 1998, cold case solved, DNA. Twist stuns investigators. The story ran on every major network within hours. 25 years of mystery cracked open by science. A victory for technology, for perseverance, for justice. Keenan stood off to the side of the press room, watching the words roll off the sheriff's tongue. He spoke in calm, measured sentences. We can confirm that advances in forensic genealogy have led to a conclusive identification. The suspect, David Riker, is deceased. Closure has been achieved for the victim's family. But even as the cameras clicked, she could feel the falseness of it, the way the truth had been trimmed and polished to fit neatly on a headline. No mention of twins, no mention of identity collapse, no mention of the impossible. When it was over, she walked out into the heat. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining under the morning sun. A small crowd had gathered outside the courthouse, townspeople, old neighbors of Emily Sloan, some carrying flowers. They looked relieved. Some cried. Others simply stood there watching her, as if expecting an ending she couldn't give. One older woman approached, her frail, trembling hands clutching a folded photo. It was Emily, smiling in a field of sunflowers. "You brought her peace," the woman whispered. Keenan wanted to believe that. She wanted to say yes, that justice had been served, that the ghosts could finally rest. But when she looked at that picture, all she saw was the reflection in the mirror. The blurred face at the end of the hallway, the two figures merged into one shadow. Peace was not what this case had left behind. Back at the station, she opened the evidence locker one last time. The box marked Sloan E. 1998 sat on the middle shelf, sealed with new tape. She ran her fingers over the label. Every answer they'd found had come from this box, and yet it felt like a trap, a riddle disguised as resolution. A soft knock at the door pulled her from thought. It was Dr. Marin Ortiz, the state forensic psychologist assigned to the review board. She held a file under her arm and a look that said, "You're not going to like this." "There's something you should see," Ortiz said, laying out several sheets across the table. They were transcriptions from the most recent psychological evaluation of David Riker, or Grace, as Keenan now knew. The words chilled her. Question, "What's your full name?" Answer both. Question, "Both what?" Answer both of us. He never left. Ortiz met Keenan's eyes. She's not faking. The split isn't an act. There's no clean divide between Grace and David anymore. Keenan studied the transcript, her pulse quickening. Multiple personality. Ortiz shook her head. Not exactly. More like a full identity merge. Think of it as psychological grafting, one consciousness living in another's structure. She's not pretending to be him. She is him and he's her. She's convinced they're the same being. A shiver ran through Keenan's spine. It was the kind of truth that didn't fit into reports or courtrooms, the kind that stayed behind your eyelids when you tried to sleep. Later that night, she drove out to the Clearwater detention facility. The road stretched endlessly, the sky bruised purple by the fading light. The guard at the desk nodded without asking questions. By now, everyone knew who she was. When the door to the interview room opened, Riker was already waiting, seated in the same rigid position as before. The same calm face. Only the eyes had changed, distant, unfocused, as if staring through glass at something only he could see. "I read your evaluation," Keenan said. He didn't move. "You said he never left." A faint smile curved his lips. "He hasn't." Keenan sat down across from him. "Grace," she said, deliberately using the name. "Tell me what happened to your brother." He blinked slowly. "Which one?" Her stomach tightened. "David." A pause, then softly, "He's still here." The words were delivered with such conviction that Keenan almost believed them. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. She leaned forward. "Why Emily Sloan?" Riker's expression flickered a momentary break like static in a broadcast. She saw, he whispered. "Saw what?" "The difference." She looked at me and saw both. She wasn't supposed to see. Silence pressed in like fog. Keenan's breath trembled. "So you killed her?" Riker tilted his head slightly. "I kept her from telling." "Isn't that what you do, keep stories under control?" The guard shifted by the door, uneasy. Keenan forced her voice steady. "You don't get to rewrite what you did." But Riker's gaze was somewhere else, entirely drifting beyond her. "You think this ends with me?" he said quietly, "but it doesn't. You opened something that won't close." The words lingered cold and certain. 2 days later, Keenan received a call from the facility. Riker had been found unresponsive in his cell just before dawn. No struggle, no sign of suicide. He was sitting upright against the wall, eyes open, pulse gone. The coroner listed the cause as cardiac arrest. Keenan attended the autopsy. She told herself it was professional obligation, but deep down, she needed to see the proof that the case, the body, the story were all real. When the pathologist began the incision, he froze. "That's odd," he murmured. The internal organs showed signs of mosaicism, 2 sets of chromosomes in different tissues, male and female, interlaced at the cellular level. It wasn't just a twin absorbed in the womb. It was a body that had rewritten itself over time, adapting, blending, becoming something else entirely. Keenan felt her pulse hammer. Science could explain fragments, but not the totality, not the way the human body could carry ghosts. Afterward, she stood in the hallway outside the morgue, the sterile smell clinging to her. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her head. She tried to focus on procedure evidence transfer signature storage, but her mind kept replaying Riker's final words. "You opened something that won't close." And that night, she drove back to Cypress Bay for the first time in months. The old Sloan house still stood at the edge of the orange grove, boarded up, forgotten. The crime scene tape had long since faded to white. Grass had overtaken the driveway. She parked, stepped out, and listened. The wind moved through the trees like a whisper. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. The front door creaked open. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and rot. The bedroom looked smaller than she remembered, the walls stripped, the floor still faintly stained. She stood in the doorway, where the mirror once hung, staring at the empty space. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a flicker in the reflection of the window pane. 2 figures overlapping. Her breath caught. Then lightning flashed, and they were gone. She whispered into the dark, "Emily, I did what I could." But the house gave no answer. Only the rain began, again tapping against the broken glass like fingers on a coffin. By the time she left, dawn was breaking over the grove. The world outside looked unchanged, traffic lights, blinking birds rising over the trees, but something in her had shifted irreversibly. The line between truth and myth, between evidence and ghost, had been erased. Back at headquarters, the final case summary awaited her signature. She stared at the last line typed neatly in black ink. "Subject deceased. Investigation concluded." She hesitated for a long time, pen hovering above the page. Then, in the margin, she wrote 3 words in her own hand, words that would never appear in the public file. Not the end. She capped her pen, closed the folder, and slid it into the archive. Somewhere in the vault of forgotten cases, another box sat waiting. Another mystery buried beneath the illusion of closure. As Keenan walked out of the precinct, the early sunlight cut across her face, sharp and blinding. In the reflection of the glass doors, for just a heartbeat, she thought she saw another figure walking beside her. Same stride, same silhouette, a second shadow, following in perfect sync. When she blinked, it was gone, but the air around her still carried that quiet, impossible whisper, a voice she couldn't unhear. He never left. 2 weeks after the press conference, the world had already moved on. Headlines, faded cameras packed up, and Cypress Bay returned to its ordinary rhythm. Tourists drifting along the marina, kids biking past the shuttered school, the hum of everyday life pretending not to remember. But Detective Laura Keenan couldn't forget. The silence after closure was worse than the noise of the investigation. It was the sound of something still breathing under the floorboards. She sat at her desk long after everyone else had gone home, the flicker of the monitor painting shadows on the walls. The file labeled "Sloan Closed" lay beside her coffee mug, its corners damp from condensation. Every page told her to move on. Every instinct told her not to. The call came just after midnight, a dispatcher's voice strained and uncertain. "Detective Keenan, you'll want to hear this? We just had a break-in reported at the old Sloan residence." Her pulse kicked hard against her ribs. "That house has been sealed since—" "I know, but the responding officers say the door was open, lights on inside." Keenan grabbed her keys before the dispatcher finished. By the time she arrived, the grove was shrouded in mist. 2 squad cars idled near the porch, their red-blue lights staining the fog like ink in water. The front door hung ajar, its rusted hinges whispering with every gust of wind. An officer met her at the gate flashlight, trembling in his hand. No sign of forced entry, he said. Just this. He led her inside. The air smelled of mildew and rain-soaked wood. The boards creaked under her boots as she moved down the hall, the same hall where Emily Sloane's life had ended. Then she saw it. On the bedroom wall, beneath a layer of dust, someone had written in a single line of wet condensation traced by a fingertip. He never left. Her breath froze. You touched that. The officer shook his head. No one did. There's no moisture anywhere else in the room. We checked. Keenan stepped closer. The letters were fresh, still glistening faintly in the beam of her flashlight. She brushed her glove across the plaster. Cold, not damp. The message had appeared as if from the inside of the wall itself. Secure the perimeter, she said quietly, and get forensics down here. Now! While the team photographed the wall, she scanned the rest of the house. The mirrors, every one of them, had been turned to face the wall. Even the small vanity mirror in the bedroom had been flipped backward, its reflection hidden. Someone knew what haunted that glass. The next morning, the forensic team confirmed her unease. No fingerprints, no recent footprints, no signs of intrusion. Yet the residue analysis on the wall revealed something chilling: traces of sodium ammonia and epithelial cells, the chemical makeup of human sweat. Someone had written those words from inside the room, but the DNA sample matched David Riker. Keenan stared at the report in disbelief. Riker was dead. His autopsy had been verified, his remains cremated under state supervision. And yet here it was, a fresh sample, genetically identical to the man buried 2 weeks earlier. She drove to the lab herself, demanding a retest. The analyst, pale and exhausted, met her eyes over the hum of the sequencer. I ran it 3 times, he said. Same profile every time, there's no error. Impossible. He hesitated. Unless the cells were transferred from something stored in the house. Maybe old tissue or hair fragments left behind decades ago. Keenan knew that wasn't true. The house had been scrubbed after the case closed. There was nothing left of 1998 except ghosts. That night, she pulled up the footage from Riker's interrogation again. The camera caught every detail, the stillness, the soft rhythm of his breathing, the way he'd glanced toward the corner of the room as if listening to someone only he could hear. You opened something that won't close. His words echoed louder now. By morning, another report hit her desk. A local news crew shooting a cold case closure segment had captured strange interference on their camera feed while filming outside the courthouse. The footage glitched and froze, then, for 3 frames, displayed an image that shouldn't exist, a face pressed against the lens, pale and familiar. Emily Sloane. When the clip was slowed down, her expression was blank, neither terror nor peace, just stillness, as if she were waiting. Keenan didn't believe in hauntings, but she did believe in patterns, and the pattern forming around her was too precise to ignore. She drove to Clearwater to speak with Dr. Marin Ortiz again. The psychologist looked drawn, sleepless. You still think she's dead? Ortiz asked without preamble. She is, but something of her isn't. Ortiz studied her cautious. You mean Grace? I mean both. The doctor's eyes darkened. What if you're right? She said quietly. If Grace truly absorbed parts of her brother in utero, not just his DNA, but fragments of his brain tissue, she might have carried echoes of him neural residues that mimic separate consciousness. What happens when that body dies? Where do those echoes go? Keenan's voice was barely above a whisper. They find somewhere else. Ortiz hesitated. You're saying the identity itself is contagious. I'm saying it doesn't die. That evening, Keenan returned home for the first time in days. The sun was sinking low over the bay, painting the sky in bleeding red and gold. She left her badge on the counter, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window. The reflection in the glass stared back at her, the same tired eyes, the same dark circles, but something in the tilt of the head made her pause. For just a heartbeat, her reflection didn't move when she did. The glass cracked under her grip, water spilling across the sill. When she looked again, the reflection was normal. But in the broken shard on the floor, she swore she saw 2 faces overlapping hers and his. The next day, the state lab called again. Another irregularity had surfaced in the Riker autopsy. During the tissue cataloging, a small fragment had gone missing, a section of preserved brain matter used for histology slides. The sample had been logged but never reached storage. Gone, vanished. The technician responsible swore she'd placed it in the containment bin herself. Security footage showed her carrying it down the hall. Then a 3-second blackout in the feed. When the lights returned, she was standing alone, empty-handed, staring into space. Keenan froze the frame, zooming in. On the reflective surface of a metal cabinet beside the technician, a faint shape appeared, a human silhouette behind her, blurred but unmistakable. Grace. No, not Grace, not David. Something between them, something born from both. Keenan's phone buzzed. It was Ortiz. Her voice was sharp with panic. Laura, listen to me. I've been reviewing the psychological footage. In the last session, she described a place, a house with mirrors turned to the wall. She said it wasn't a memory. She said it was waiting. Keenan gripped the phone tighter. When did she say that? The night before she died. Static filled the line for a moment. Then Ortiz whispered, Detective, did you turn those mirrors yourself? Keenan didn't answer. Outside, thunder rolled again. The same storm, the same air, the same humidity that had clung to everything in 1998. She looked down at the reopened case file, now heavy with new addendums. Every photo, every report, every name, the same cycle repeating like the investigation itself was trapped in a loop. The title on the folder seemed to shift in the dim light, the ink bleeding slightly, as if rewritten from within. Florida, 1998, cold case unsolved. Keenan closed her eyes, pressing her palms against her temples. For a second, she thought she heard the faint static of a 911 tape, the scream that had started it all replaying somewhere deep inside her head. Then beneath it a whisper, soft, familiar, not male, not female, both. You see us now? She opened her eyes. The office was empty, but her reflection in the window wasn't. It smiled first. The sun never seemed to rise properly anymore. It hovered somewhere behind the haze, diffused and colorless, like light filtered through dirty glass. Detective Laura Keenan hadn't slept in 3 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the reflection in her window, her face and another overlapping in perfect symmetry. The department had started to notice. Captain Hughes pulled her aside that morning, his tone caught between concern and command. Laura, you need time off, he said. You closed the biggest case this county's seen in 20 years. Go home. But she couldn't, because she knew what he didn't, the case wasn't closed. The new DNA report lay on her desk, delivered by an intern who looked too young to understand what he was handing over. The envelope bore a red stamp, retest request confidential. She tore it open and felt the breath leave her body. The analysis had been run automatically when her last evidence submission passed through the system, a contamination cross-check, standard protocol. Only this time, the profile flagged a match where none should exist. The DNA from the condensation on the wall of the Sloan house, the one that spelled "he never left," showed a partial correlation to Detective Laura Keenan. 52% overlap, half her genome mirrored inverted. She stared at the report until the letters blurred. No one else had seen it yet. The file hadn't been uploaded to the official database. It was just data on a local terminal waiting for verification. She closed the window and deleted the cache. Her hands shook as she locked her office door. For years, she'd hunted ghosts. Now she was afraid of finding one in her own blood. She drove straight to the forensics unit in Tallahassee, 2 hours through heat and thunder. The lab director, Dr. Elena Morse, owed her favors from old cases. Morse met her at the back entrance, expression grave. You look like hell, Laura. Run it again, Keenan said, handing her the sample number. Quietly. Morse hesitated, scanning the barcode. That's your case, the Riker file. Just do it. 3 hours later, Morse came back pale. It's not contamination. Keenan's voice was barely a whisper. Then what? The system's reading a shared genetic signature, close but not exact. Like a sibling, except the chromosomal pattern doesn't fit. It's inverted. Like a mirror copy. That shouldn't be possible. Keenan gripped the edge of the table. Could it be lab error? Morse shook her head. This isn't noise, Laura. It's deliberate. Someone wanted this sample to match you halfway. Outside, lightning split the sky open, rattling the glass. For a moment, Keenan thought she heard a voice beneath the thunder, low, steady. Familiar. You opened it. She left the lab before dawn. Rain fell in sheets across the highway wipers, struggling to keep up. Every oncoming headlight looked like an interrogation lamp. At a rest stop halfway home, she washed her hands in the sink, scrubbing until her knuckles bled. The water spiraled pink down the drain. When she looked up, the mirror above the basin was fogged from steam. On its surface, letters formed slowly as if written from the other side. We're the same. Her breath hitched. She stepped back, knocking into the stall door. When she wiped the glass clean, nothing was there, just her reflection, pale and wide-eyed. Back in Cypress Bay, the station was nearly empty. She went straight to the archive, pulling the Riker file again. The photographs stared back at her. Emily's bedroom, the overturned lamp, the smear of blood on the floorboards. In one corner, near the baseboard, a dark streak she'd never noticed before. She magnified it. The outline was faint, but undeniable, a handprint. She cross-checked the latent print record. No match had ever been logged for that print, too partial, too smudged. But when she overlaid it with her own palm for comparison, the shape aligned perfectly. Her stomach turned. She told herself it was coincidence, pattern recognition. But a part of her, the part that had listened to Riker's final words, whispered that it wasn't. The following morning, the sheriff's office received an anonymous package addressed to Det. Keenan. Inside was a single Polaroid time-stamped but undated. It showed the exterior of the Sloan house. In the front window, barely visible through the grime, was a figure. A woman. Laura Keenan. Same haircut, same jacket she was wearing that day. She dropped the photo. It fluttered to the floor like something alive. By noon, her badge had been suspended pending an internal inquiry into unauthorized evidence access. Someone had leaked the lab report linking her DNA to the scene. Reporters gathered outside the precinct again, shouting questions. Detective Keenan, are you a suspect? Is the real killer still out there? Was the case ever solved? She pushed through them, wordlessly, head down. The heat felt suffocating. At home, the air conditioner rattled like an old engine. The silence pressed in thick and claustrophobic. She poured herself whiskey straight from the bottle, sat on the floor, and spread the photos across the tiles. Emily, Grace, David. All the same eyes, staring back. In the faint hum of the refrigerator, she thought she heard something breathing. Not from her, not from the house. From somewhere inside the walls. She stood listening. The sound faded, replaced by a slow, rhythmic tapping from the vent. She climbed onto the counter, unscrewed the grill, and reached inside. Her fingers brushed paper old brittle. She pulled it free. It was a note yellowed with age. The handwriting, neat slanted. August 31st, 1998. She saw both of us. I can't let her tell. If anyone finds this, we are one. Remember me. No signature. But the indentation of the pen carved a name into the wood beneath L. Keenan. Her breath stopped. Her name. The next morning, she drove back to the Sloan house, ignoring the suspension order. The sun was high, the sky a harsh blue. The front door hung open again. She stepped inside. The mirrors were gone, every one of them. The walls were bare except for the bedroom, where a single mirror had been rehung facing outward. In its surface, the room looked endless, an infinite reflection of decay. Keenan approached slowly. Her reflection seemed delayed by half a heartbeat. When she lifted her hand, it lingered behind. When she leaned forward, it smiled before she did. "Who are you?" she whispered. The reflection tilted its head, you know. The glass rippled faintly as though something pressed from the other side. Her pulse roared in her ears. She forced herself to really look, and saw what had been hiding there all along. Not her face, not Riker's, something between. A composite, male and female layered like double exposure. We're the same. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. The sound shattered the trance, but the air remained electric, charged with presence. The house groaned wood settling or breathing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered without thinking. A voice on the line, calm, measured, unmistakable. Detective Keenan, it said. You shouldn't have come back. Her mouth went dry. Who is this? You know. The call disconnected. The number traced back to a prepaid phone registered under a name she hadn't heard in months. Grace Riker. Keenan sank to her knees. The case wasn't haunting her. It was recreating itself through her. The DNA, the reflections, the fingerprints. Everything pointed to one conclusion too terrible to face. She was becoming the next iteration. The case wasn't just unsolved. It was evolving. Outside, thunder rolled again, though the sky was clear. She looked once more into the mirror. The reflection waited patiently, almost tenderly, as if inviting her to step closer. "Tell me what you want," she whispered. The reflection's lips moved with hers, but the voice that answered wasn't hers at all. "To finish what we started." The glass splintered down the center like a wound, and the world fell silent. The morning after the mirror shattered, the world outside looked perfectly ordinary. Cypress Bay shimmered under the sun gulls circling above the water children riding bikes past the courthouse steps. Yet for Detective Laura Keenan, nothing was ordinary anymore. Her suspension papers had been delivered the night before. She'd signed them without reading hands still trembling. The department wanted distance order silence. But the case was still alive, changing, breathing, evolving without permission. She drove to headquarters anyway. The guard at the front desk didn't stop her. Maybe he didn't see her, or maybe he didn't dare. The hallways felt wrong, colder, narrower, as though the building itself were holding its breath. In the evidence room, the box labeled Sloan, 1998 closed, was gone. The shelf where it belonged sat empty, dustless. She opened the digital archive file after file flickered and blinked out. A message appeared on screen for a fraction of a second before vanishing. Access restricted, chain rewritten. She checked the backup drive, the same message. The entire case had rewritten itself. Keenan pressed her palms against the desk, forcing her breath steady. "Computer error," she whispered, but even the words sounded hollow. She reached for the phone to call IT, but the line clicked before she dialed. A voice on the other end spoke first, steady, official, familiar. "This is Detective Keenan, authorization code A01. Her blood went cold. It was her own voice. The line went dead. By noon, she was sitting in the parking lot, notebook open on the steering wheel. She began rewriting what she remembered before it vanished too. Dates, names, fragments, anything that could anchor her to something real. Emily Sloan, 1998, David and Grace Riker DNA anomaly. Case closed, unsolved, closed again. Every time she lifted the pen, the ink seemed lighter, the letters thinner, until the last line faded as she watched. She snapped the notebook shut. She wasn't losing her mind. She was losing the record. That afternoon, she drove to see Dr. Marin Ortiz again. The psychologist's office overlooked the bay sunlight, spilling across shelves of clinical textbooks. Ortiz looked tired, her voice hoarse from too many sleepless nights. "You've seen what's happening," Keenan said. Files disappearing, my voice on the line. Ortiz folded her hands. "Laura, trauma can mimic pattern recognition. You've been inside this case too long." Keenan shook her head. "The data's changing, Marin. Physical evidence, not memory. Someone or something is rewriting it." Ortiz hesitated. "If we assume the Riker case involved a genetic duality, what if that duality extended beyond biology, a psychological contagion? You studied every scrap of this case for months. Maybe your brain's reconstructing itself around it." "Are you saying I'm infected?" "I'm saying identity is more porous than we think." Keenan leaned forward. "Then how do I stop it?" Ortiz didn't answer right away. She scribbled something on a pad and tore off the page. "There's one place that still holds analog records, paper, microfilm, unscannable. County Archives, St. Augustine branch. Go there. If the case history's changing digitally, the original paper trail might still exist." Keenan drove east before sunset. The highway stretched straight through miles of swamp and cypress, the air shimmering with heat. By nightfall, she reached the old courthouse building. Its marble facade cracked its lights dim. Inside, dust floated in the glow of her flashlight. Rows of cabinets lined the walls, steel-heavy, ancient. She found the homicide drawer index 1998, 1999. The labels were handwritten. Her fingers traced the names until she reached Sloan Emily. The folder was there, intact. She opened it slowly. Inside were the original crime scene photographs, faded but untouched. But something new had been slipped among them, a Polaroid, identical to the one mailed to her house. On the back, written in fresh ink, were 3 words. "File your report." The handwriting was hers. Her pulse quickened. She turned the photo over. This time, the figure in the window wasn't her. It was Emily Sloan, standing alive, staring out at the camera. Behind her, the shape of another person loomed half visible. Keenan slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. She shoved the file into her bag and hurried down the hallway, shoes slipping on the marble. At the exit, she caught her reflection in the glass door. It looked tired, frightened, and smiling. She drove all night back to Cypress Bay. The folder sat on the passenger seat like a living thing. At dawn, she reached the precinct only to find yellow tape across the entrance. A janitor, sweeping the sidewalk, looked up. "You can't go in there, ma'am. Building's closed. Fire last night." Her throat went dry. "Anyone hurt?" He shook his head. "No staff, just records. They said it started in the evidence room." The words hit her like impact. The archives, the box, everything gone. She turned and walked back to her car, numb. The town was waking up news vans, early commuters, joggers along the pier. On every newsstand she passed, the headline glared in block letters. Florida, 1998. Cold case reopened. Detective missing. Her photograph stared back from the front page. She bought a copy with shaking hands. The article quoted Captain Hughes. Detective Keenan has been placed on indefinite leave pending investigation into evidence tampering. The date at the top read August 31st, the same date as the note she'd found in her vent, 27 years to the day after Emily Sloan's death. Keenan drove aimlessly until the gaslight came on. She ended up at the shoreline, the same dock where she'd met reporters weeks earlier. The tide lapped against the pylons. The morning air smelled of salt and ozone. She opened the folder again. The ink on the Polaroid's back had smeared the words, now unreadable, but the image itself had changed. The woman in the window, Emily, was gone. Only the second figure remained clearer now, wearing a badge, holding a folder. Her badge, her folder. A wave hit the dock, spraying her legs. She felt the cold sting of salt water and something else, a faint vibration from her phone. A new email notification glowed on the screen. No sender, no subject, just a single attachment. Sloan_report_final.pdf. She opened it. The first page was her own case summary, exactly as she'd written it weeks ago. But at the bottom, beneath her signature, a new line had been added. Investigating Officer Emily Sloan. Her chest tightened. She scrolled down. Page after page rewrote itself before her eyes, her name dissolving, replaced by another. Keenan dropped the phone. It slid across the dock and stopped at the edge screen, flickering. For a moment, she saw her reflection in the black glass, then another face overlaying it, faint but smiling. The wind picked up, scattering the pages from the open folder into the sea. White paper against black water, spinning, sinking. Behind her, a voice spoke softly right at her shoulder. "You filed the report?" She turned, but there was no one there, only her shadow stretching long across the dock, split into two distinct outlines under the rising sun. The first morning of the inquiry broke hot and airless, the kind of Florida heat that pressed against the glass like a living thing. Detective Laura Keenan sat alone at the end of a long conference table, while ceiling fans stirred the air above the courthouse annex. Across from her, a row of state officials leafed through folders stamped Internal Review Evidence Integrity. They weren't looking for truth. They were looking for control. A gray-haired commissioner cleared his throat. "Detective Keenan, you are here to address inconsistencies between your case documentation and the current digital record of the Sloan investigation. Do you acknowledge that multiple versions of the same report now exist in state archives?" Keenan nodded once. "Yes, sir, but I didn't alter them." A murmur rippled down the table. Another official slid a tablet toward her. On the screen, her typed report scrolled upward paragraphs, shifting in real time, words rearranging themselves. The commissioners stared as the final line rewrote itself. Investigator Laura Keenan, Emily Sloan co-author. Someone swore under their breath. Keenan's pulse pounded. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. The files aren't stable." The chairwoman leaned forward, voice sharp. "Detective documents don't rewrite themselves." "No," Keenan said quietly. "People do." The room fell silent. When they adjourned, she stepped into the blinding sunlight outside. Reporters waited on the courthouse steps, microphones flashing. "Detective, is it true the Sloan file names you as suspect? Are you under investigation? Did you falsify DNA evidence?" She pushed through them without answering. sweat stinging her eyes. Each camera flash left a white ghost in her vision. Back in her car, she opened the analog folder she'd taken from St. Augustine. The photographs inside had faded further, the colors almost drained. Only one image remained clear, the Polaroid of the window. The reflection on the glass had changed again. Now it showed the inquiry room behind her, the commissioner's frozen mid-gesture. She slammed the folder shut. That night, she rented a cheap motel room on the edge of town. The neon sign outside buzzed weakly, turning the curtains pink and blue. She spread her notes across the bedspread, marking every event that no longer matched the public record. August 31st, 1998, Emily Sloan murdered. September 2023. Case reopened. September 2025. Files rewritten. In the margin, she scrawled one question: who's writing it now? Sleep came in brief flashes. Faces timestamps the hum of the crime lab sequencer. She woke to a knock at the door just before dawn. Dr. Marin Ortiz stood outside, hair tied back, eyes red from the road. "They pulled my clearance," she said. "The department thinks I fed you confidential data. They're deleting the Riker recordings." Keenan stepped aside wordlessly. Ortiz dropped a flash drive on the table. Backup of everything. But there's something else. The system metadata shows a new user ID editing the files over the last week _Sloan98. It's not spoofed. It's verified by the state network. Somebody inside is using her credentials. Keenan felt a chill despite the heat. That account was deactivated in '99. I know. They drove to the data center annex, a concrete block at the edge of the county complex. Inside, rows of servers hummed in the dark, each one blinking like a heartbeat. Ortiz pulled up the access logs on a terminal. The user _Sloan98 had signed in every night between 2:14 and 2:19 a.m., exactly the same window when Emily Sloan's 911 call had been logged 27 years earlier. "Maybe someone's copying the timestamp to mess with us," Ortiz said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or maybe they're following it," Keenan murmured. They traced the login source to a workstation on the 3rd floor, an archival scanning bay that hadn't been used since the digitization project ended years ago. Dust coated the monitors. Only one terminal still glowed faintly. On screen, a document was open. Case Summary Detective Laura Keenan. New text appeared line by line as they watched, as though being typed by invisible hands. Investigator returned to scene. Evidence persists. Memory corrects record. Identity pending. Ortiz whispered, "Is this live?" Keenan reached toward the keyboard. The cursor blinked, then moved on its own, spelling 2 final words before the screen went black. "Stay out." The power cut an instant later. The servers hummed down to silence. Outside, thunder rolled in from the Gulf again, the first storm of the new season. Rain hammered the roof as they hurried to Keenan's car. By the time she reached her apartment, the building's power was out. Emergency lights flickered in the hallway. Her door was ajar. Inside, the air smelled faintly of ozone and printer toner. Every photo on her wall case, Schott's family pictures, commendations, had been reprinted in grayscale. Across the bottom of each one, typed in neat courier font, were 2 words filed correctly. Her laptop sat open on the kitchen table, a cursor blinking on an empty document. She hesitated, then sat down. The machine beeped. A text line appeared automatically, as if waiting for her to continue. "Detective, please confirm closing statement." Her hands hovered over the keyboard. The request was formatted exactly like a forensic report prompt, the kind she'd filled hundreds of times. She typed slowly. "Case unresolved." The screen paused, then replied, "Acknowledged. Continue investigation." And below it, another line appeared, this one not machine formatted, but typed in italics. "You remember more than you wrote." She closed the laptop, heart hammering. The rain outside turned violent, rattling the windows. She poured coffee with shaking hands, watching the lights flicker. Her phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number, August 31st, 1998. Check the school. The sender IDE _Sloan98. She grabbed her coat. Cypress Bay Elementary had been shut down for renovations, fenced off, and dark. She parked by the gate, climbed over, and crossed the cracked asphalt toward the main building. Lightning illuminated the old playground swings moving in the wind. Inside, the corridors smelled of rust and dust. She found the maintenance office where the 1998 air conditioning logs had been kept. The filing cabinet was open folders scattered. On the wall above it hung a bulletin board, still bearing the same faded staff photos, teachers smiling in front of the school. Emily Sloan in the center. A red pinhole mark dotted the corner of her picture, fresh, precise. Keenan shone her flashlight lower. Beneath the board, a single maintenance tag was taped to the wall. Work order hash, G174 Riker G, signed off by L. Keenan. Her breath caught. She never signed that. A thunderclap shook the building, dust falling from the ceiling. She tore the tag free and backed toward the door. The hallway lights flickered to life for one brief second. In that instant, she saw her own reflection in the glass of the display case opposite the reflection, standing perfectly still while she moved. Then darkness again. She stepped outside into the rain, soaked through, gripping the crumpled tag in her fist. The ink was already bleeding away. By dawn, she was back on the pier, the folder beside her, waves breaking against the pylons. She stared at the horizon, gray and endless, and whispered the only thing that made sense anymore. Someone's still writing. Rain still clung to the windows of the state complex when the task force briefing began. The conference room looked identical to 100 others Keenan had sat through in her career, a long table, flickering projector, the smell of stale coffee. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that this one was different. The people in the room weren't looking at her. They were studying her. Special Agent Rosa Delgado from the Bureau's Digital Forensics Unit took the floor. A former systems engineer, precise and expressionless. 3 weeks ago, she said the Sloan file began propagating through the state database. Since then, 27 dormant case files have been modified in the same way, identical timestamps, identical metadata signature E_Sloan 98. The screen behind her filled with a grid of file names. Each line ended with the same notation, edited by E_Sloan 98, verified by L. Keenan. Someone at the table shifted uncomfortably. Delgado continued, "We've run physical server audits. No external breaches, no malware. Whatever's doing this is authenticating through state credentials, both of yours." Keenan spoke quietly. "I haven't logged into those systems since my suspension." Delgado's eyes didn't waver. "Then somebody or something has your access at the kernel level. They're rewriting history from the inside." Captain Hughes leaned forward, his voice gravelly. "Are we saying this is sabotage?" Delgado hesitated. "Sabotage implies motive. Right now, all we have is replication. Each altered file redates itself to 1998, inserts cross-references to the Sloan homicide, and changes the investigator of record to Detective Keenan." A murmur rippled through the room. Keenan felt the heat rise in her chest. "You think I'm doing this?" "No one's accusing you," Hughes said, though his tone carried the weight of doubt. Delgado tapped a key. A map of Florida appeared dotted with red markers. Every affected file originated within a 50-mile radius of Cypress Bay. All involve unsolved violent crimes from the same summer. The digital fingerprints are identical down to the checksum. Keenan stared at the pattern. The dots formed a rough spiral centered on the old school. Delgado clicked to the next slide, a video still. Surveillance from the county archives captured the night Keenan and Ortiz had visited. A figure in a dark coat entering the third-floor data bay. The timestamp read 02:17 a.m. "Is that me?" Keenan whispered. The image was blurry, distorted by static. The posture was hers, but the face, if it was a face, looked younger, smoother. Delgado said nothing. The projector light flickered, painting ghost shadows on the wall. The meeting adjourned in silence. Outside, Ortiz caught up with her in the hallway. "They're scared," she said. "Half of them think you're hacking the system. The other half think it's haunted." Keenan managed a hollow laugh. "Maybe it's both." That evening, the task force ordered a full isolation of all affected drives. Keenan wasn't supposed to have access anymore, but habit and instinct overrode rules. She waited until the office emptied, swiped a visitor badge from the desk, and slipped into the data forensics lab. The servers stood in neat rows, humming softly under cold light. She found the quarantine drive labeled Sloan_cluster. The access terminal required dual authentication. Her badge worked. So did her old password. The directory opened like a wound. Every file carried her initials. Every report used her phrasing, her syntax. but some contained details she had never written, conversations that never happened, evidence she'd never seen. In one report, a witness named E. Riker described a female detective visiting their home in 1998, 2 years before Keenan had even joined the force. She opened another file. It was a transcript of an interview, her voice questioning, another voice answering. Keenan, tell me what you remember. Subject, you were there. You wrote it down. Keenan, who are you? Subject, you already know. The playback timestamp read August 31st, 1998, 03:27 a.m. She shut the terminal, heart pounding. The next morning, Delgado called her into the field office. We found something in the checksum pattern, she said. A repeating header binary code that translates to text. It spells a phrase over and over. She handed Keenan a printout. Lines of 1S and 0S ran down the page. In the margin, the translation. We are correcting the file. Delgado watched her closely. Does that mean anything to you? Keenan shook her head slowly. Not yet. Then I suggest you make it mean something soon, Delgado said, because the Bureau's about to pull every device you've touched for forensic imaging. By evening, Keenan's apartment looked like a crime scene equipment. Boxed hard drives, sealed agents photographing every surface. She stood in the doorway, hollow-eyed, while technicians packed her laptop into evidence bags. One of them glanced up. Ma'am, you want to keep your notebook? She nodded, taking it gently. The pages were blank. Every note she'd written in ink had faded overnight. That night, she drove back to the pier again. The town lights shimmered across the bay. The folder lay open on the passenger seat, the edges damp from the humidity. She wrote a single line on the first clean page left in her notebook. If the record changes, who remembers the original? Wind lifted the papers, flipping to a second page, one she didn't recall writing. The handwriting wasn't hers. Laura, the file remembers for you. She stared until the ink blurred. At dawn, she met Ortiz at a diner outside town. Ortiz slid a USB drive across the table. Delgado thinks I'm off the case, she said, but I copied something before they shut down access. You need to see this. On Keenan's laptop, the screen filled with a newly generated case index, every cold case in the region sorted by date. At the bottom, a new entry had appeared overnight. Case hash 0000, unfiled homicide investigator Laura Keenan, victim Laura Keenan. Ortiz whispered, That's not in the database. It only exists on your device. Keenan's pulse hammered. She scrolled down. The report contained a single paragraph. Subject last seen August 31st, 2025, near Cypress Bay Elementary. File status pending. Ortiz looked at her. We can prove someone planted this. We just have to trace. The lights in the diner flickered. The laptop screen went black. When it came back, the case number had changed 1998, 174. The same number as the maintenance tag from the school. Neither woman spoke. Outside, the sky had gone white with heat. Somewhere beyond the glass, thunder rumbled again, low, distant, inevitable. Keenan closed the laptop carefully, as though sealing a living thing. It's not rewriting the past, she said. It's writing ahead. Ortiz swallowed hard. Then what happens when it catches up? Keenan looked toward the bay, where the horizon shimmered like a screen. I guess we find out who's really filing the report. The Bureau moved fast once the anomalies crossed county lines. Within a week, a joint task force occupied the state's Digital Forensics Center in Tallahassee. Every officer who had ever touched a cold case file was summoned for review. News outlets called it the Data Ghost Scandal. Detective Laura Keenan arrived under escort, not invitation. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like an interrogation before it began. Mirrored walls, humming lights, nowhere to look but at herself. Special Agent Rosa Delgado greeted her with the same clipped professionalism as before, but now there was fatigue behind the precision. You're not under arrest, she said, sliding a badge across the table. You're being reinstated temporarily as consultant. You know the system better than anyone. Keenan eyed the badge. You still think I caused this? Delgado shook her head. No, I think you're part of whatever's causing it. Screens lined the war room walls, maps, case logs, server traces, red markers pulsed across Florida like a spreading infection. Delgado pointed to the timeline. Every night at 02:14 a.m., a new set of edits appears, always within the old case database, always authenticated. The most recent wave hit Miami-Dade, Pensacola, Jacksonville. 42 files in 24 hours. Keenan leaned closer. What's changing? Mostly metadata, Delgado said. Dates investigators, small textual shifts. But in 5 cases, the edits introduced new evidence photos, witness statements, even lab reports. The scary part, the inserted material checks out. Fingerprints, serial numbers, chain of custody forms, everything appears authentic. Keenan frowned. You're saying it's manufacturing reality. I'm saying it's filling gaps. The room went quiet. Later alone at a workstation, Keenan scrolled through the newest files. One caught her eye. Cold case, hash 4791, Ocala, 1998. The victim's name was unfamiliar, but the format of the report was hers, her style, her rhythm. She read the first paragraph and felt her throat tighten. Detective Laura Keenan arrived on scene at 02:17 a.m. Evidence collected hair partial print fragment of cloth labeled Sloan type. She whispered, I was never in Ocala. Delgado appeared behind her. What did you find? Keenan turned the screen toward her. Delgado read silently, then exhaled. Every time we isolate one of these entries, it spawns another elsewhere. The system mirrors itself through any terminal that opens the file. So stop opening them. Delgado gave a humorless smile. Tell that to the Attorney General. By nightfall, an emergency directive ordered all legacy servers physically disconnected. Agents hauled out racks of hardware, labeling drives like hazardous material. Keenan stayed to help unscrewing panels, sealing boxes. When the last unit was shut down, the hum that had filled the building for decades faded into silence. For the first time in weeks, the network was offline. Delgado rubbed her temples. If this keeps happening after air gap, we'll know it's human. They waited. 2 a.m. came and went. No alerts, no new edits. The monitors stayed dark. Relief spread through the room. Exhausted smiles, slaps on shoulders. Someone opened a stale pot of coffee. Then at 2:19, one printer on the far wall came to life. The paper fed slowly, line by line, mechanical and deliberate. Delgado crossed the room and tore the page free. It was a single paragraph of text-plain font. System offline. Local copy initiated. Case continues manually. At the bottom was a signature blocked at L. Keenan, verified by R. Delgado. Delgado stared at her. That's my name. Keenan whispered. It's adapting. They spent the rest of the night combing through the paper logs, searching for physical evidence of tampering. None. The printers had no stored files, no network link, no memory buffer, yet each produced identical pages by morning. The Bureau's spokesperson announced a temporary suspension of all cold case reviews, but the press had already smelled blood. Headlines screamed digital saboteur inside FDLE. Reporters camped outside the gates demanding answers. Keenan stayed silent. She'd stopped trying to explain what she didn't understand. Instead, she studied the physical sheets, searching for patterns in spacing ink density alignment. Each carried micro variations that, when overlaid, formed a faint outline, a map of Cypress Bay. The epicenter again. She traced a finger along the lines, stopping at the coordinates of the old elementary school. Everything leads back there, she murmured. Delgado nodded. Then that's where we go. They arrived just after dusk. The property was under renovation scaffolding tarps, the smell of concrete dust. Inside, the power was off except for one generator lighting the central hallway. Workers had cleared most of the debris, exposing the bare walls. Delgado unrolled a copy of the maintenance blueprint. According to this, the server room's crawl space should line up with the old maintenance tunnel. That's where the first Riker work order was logged. They descended through a hatch beneath the floor. The air was thick with humidity, the concrete slick. At the far end, a rusted cabinet stood bolted to the wall. Keenan forced it open. Inside were boxes of magnetic tapes, the kind used for data backups in the late 90s, each reel labeled with a year, 1998, 1999, 2000, and one with a handwritten tag, Keenan initial. Delgado looked at her. You didn't start until 2003. I know. They carried the tape upstairs to a portable reader. When the device spun up, the screen filled with directories labeled in familiar shorthand Keenan's own system from years later. Yet every file predated her career. She opened the first log. It was a raw text file of investigation notes, her name in the header, her voice in the writing. Interview complete. subject cooperative, memory stable. Continue cycle until recognition achieved. Delgado's face hardened. These are behavioral study notes. Keenan scrolled further. The last entry froze her blood. Replication successful. Investigator assumes role. Monitor for self-awareness. She whispered, "This isn't an investigation, it's an experiment." Delgado sat back stunned. Who would run something like that? Keenan stared at the lines of code blinking at the bottom of the screen, an old FDLE research signature she hadn't seen in years. The initials matched a defunct forensic psychology program, Project Sloan. The realization hit like a cold wave. It was never about the murder, she said. It was about memory, how investigators internalize cases. They used us as test subjects to model recall and trauma. The Riker file was the pilot. Delgado rubbed a hand over her face. So the edits, the rewriting? Our feedback loops, Keenan said. The system isn't haunted, it's learning from us. Every time we reopen a case, it rewrites itself closer to how we remember it. Then why you? Because I never stopped remembering. They sat in silence, the generator humming above. At sunrise, they sealed the tape into an evidence bag and drove back to Tallahassee. Delgado filed an emergency report under a new classification, Cognitive Systems, Failure Human Interface. Keenan watched through the glass as technicians carried the tape into a restricted vault. For the first time, she felt something close to clarity, not peace, but comprehension. Later alone in the empty briefing room, she opened her notebook and wrote a single line. The cold case was never cold. It was still running. Outside, the day brightened over the Gulf, and for once, no storm followed.